Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to our basics in chess series. So in this series we're following opening principles, middle game strategies and endgame strategies. Today we're continuing with some opening principles again, and today we're asking ourselves the question, what is actually a good opening or what is actually a bad opening in chess, because probably you have chosen for yourself some openings, but these openings actually could be bad. And what I wanted to do in this video, I wanted to save you some time, because I think time is available thing in life and also in chess, of course. So that's why you have to have really healthy opening repertoire from your beginning of your career, and especially when you're a beginner. Then I think you're trying to do maybe sort of an opening. You have seen maybe Magnus Carlsen is playing maybe the perch defense and he's destroyed, I don't know, maybe Fabiano Caruana in the perch defense, and then you started to play the perch defense for yourself, and actually after 1, 2, 5 years, 10 years maybe, you have noticed that the perch defense sucks, because many times you get destroyed in the same way. That's exactly what I'm trying to prevent here, because actually the perch defense is sort of, for instance, the perch defense I'm using now, this defense is sort of a defense that you should try to avoid if you're a beginner, because you have to play, I think, much healthier openings. And in this video we are sorting out what is a good opening, what is a bad opening, because they are the basic principles in chess that you have to apply, I think. And in this video I'm going to show you especially why these openings are good and why these openings are bad. So as I said, time is a valuable thing, and I've made the same mistake. I don't want to make I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I did, because for instance, when I started to play chess, I played the perch defense, I played the Caro-Kann defense, I played the French defense, but these defenses are actually not good, because they're not meeting with this idea that I wanted to introduce you today. So let's check out now the first important principle of chess opening. I've sorted out this very important principles here. You can see that on the right side. So the first thing that your opening as black has to have is that it's attacking your opponent's side of the board in move 1. What I mean about that, for instance, if your opponent is playing something like d4, then you don't want to play c6, because this move, c6, is attacking only our side of the board. You see, it's not attacking your opponent's side of the board. So it's very important in move 1 to be already there, to be on your opponent's side of the board. So that's why, for instance, the best responses after move d4 are d5, which is now attacking immediately your opponent's side of the board. So you're already there. As I said, it's a huge difference. Or maybe a good response can also be the move here, knight to f6, which is also attacking your opponent's side of the board. So we're already attacking now the square e4. The other thing that's very important in opening theory is this one square rule, and I think this is now the most important principle of chess opening. So the one square rule says that when you're playing an opening, and when you already choosing which square are you attacking, for instance, we're attacking now the e4 square here. Now we have to stuck to the e4 square. We have to attack the e4 square further. Now we're stuck. We're just attacking this one square. This so-called one square rule. Every move that we're making now has to be sort of a idea around the square e4. It doesn't have to necessarily directly attack the e4 square, but in an indirect way, I think you have to build your attack simply around this one square. So I'm going to introduce you, for instance, this nimzo-Indian defense, which meets, for instance, this idea, this one square rule, because it's battling simply around one square. So here, for instance, your opponent can play the move c4, and of course we want to develop. We want to play now somewhere with the bishop. We have to play a pawn move, and we want to castle. That we have explained many times in our opening principles. So securing the king by castling is a very important stage of the game. So that's why here our next move is actually already a battle for the e4 square, because we're playing now the move e6. We want to develop, of course, minor pieces so far, but now after move knight to c3, you see with the move bishop to b4, although this bishop is attacking the knight, but it's actually already a battle for the e4 e4 square. So the next couple more moves will be again simply a battle for the e4 square. We can play b6, bishop to b7, and again we're targeting the same square. So that's actually a good opening. The nimzo-indian defense is a good opening, and if you put now your games in the database and you see maybe many games played by top grandmasters, you see that the nimzo-indian defense has the best success with the black pieces. So it's one of the best openings. So I'm not telling you here new stuff. This is the thing that top grandmaster know, that top grandmasters use. But I wanted to show you how you can break this one square rule immediately. For instance, you can play some other openings. You can play maybe sort of a benoni style. Here, for instance, d4, we have knight to f6, and after move c4, you can play maybe the benoni, and you can say yourself, okay, I've seen many times players are destroying with the benoni defense. The benoni defense is such a great opening, but this benoni defense already breaks the one square rule, because the knight is attacking the e4 square, the pawn c5 is already attacking the d4 square. So we're attacking now basically two squares, and we have lost a little bit time. In the nimzo-indian defense, we haven't allowed our opponent here to battle around the square e4, but now let's see in the common benoni defense, you're allowing your opponent here first of all the space advantage, and you're playing something like, I don't know, b5 could be a possible way. But even if you play something like, say, d6, knight to c3, we play g6, and now you see we have now the move e4, which is the common move for white in the benoni defense. And you see now in the beginning we have started the game by battling for the e4 square, but now we have lost the battle, I think, around that square, because our opponent has played knight to c3 and has played now the move e4. So you see, it's okay, it's playable. As I said, there are many games in which black is winning the game with the benoni defense, but as I said, I wanted to explain you that this is not a good opening, because you haven't made progress already. First of all, what we can notice, the space advantage that white is always built here will cause you many problems. And for instance, if you play even something like bishop to g7, there are even this kind of stuff that can happen. Even some 4-pawn attacks are possible. So I think if you're the beginner and if you face maybe such an opening, maybe this 4-pawn attack, you will get stormed with the pawns. You have many positional problems, and I think you should try to avoid it. So as I said, many openings are good, many openings are bad, but this, for instance, is not meeting with our one square rule. So let's see now another opening. We have here maybe the King's Indian defense, and I'm a big fan of the King's Indian defense. I played the King's Indian for a long time now, and then I stopped to play it. I'm playing now basically the Nimzo Bogo Queen's Indian with the black pieces. Here after move knight to c3, again you see with the move bishop to g7 and e4 d6, again we have broken our one square rule. So the knight is attacking again the e4 square, but our bishop is battling for the d4 square. And actually what we're trying now to do in the King's Indian, we're trying to break in the next couple of moves, of course not immediately, but here let's see possible continuation f3 casting. Now the battle will be simply around the d4 square. So we can play c5 or we can play e5. Both of these moves are common moves against these types of structures. And you see now white is built again sort of a fortress in the center. White has built a really nice central pawn storm, and we have lost again the battle around the square e4. White has cemented this position very well around that square, so it's actually already a space advantage again for white. So we have stopped to battle for this one square because we have played g6, we have played bishop to g7, which is actually targeting now the d4 square. So we have lost time in chess. That's now the most important thing to recognize. So let's see now another example. Sorry, I have some trouble. Okay, let's see now another example. So again, we have, for instance, the move d4, we have knight to f6, c4. Again, we're playing maybe the nimzo-indian, and our opponent is maybe trying to avoid this pinning idea. You see, he's trying to avoid this knight to c3 because he knows that you're going to play maybe the move bishop to b4. He's knowing that you're trying to pin him with this very annoying stuff. So again, we are battling for this one square. So as I said, we are trying now to do a control of the e4 square. What move can we play without playing with our bishop and still playing a good developing move and still battling for the e4 square? So here, for instance, good choice that you can play is the so-called Queen's Indian defense with the move b6. Although it seems that it's a passive move because the move b6 is only attacking here the 5th rank, but actually this move is really wild, because after maybe something like g3 we can play immediately bishop to b7, and we have already battled again for the e4 square. If our opponent continues now, for instance, the move knight to c3, bishop to b4 is meeting again with the same idea here, and we're again battling for the e4 square because the knight, as we said, is controlling this very important square. What you could do is in one particular moment to break a little bit this one square rule, and you could play maybe something like bishop to a6, which is not bad, because I think bishop to a6, you see, comes with a direct threat. So I've sorted also here the third important thing of good openings is that it has to be sort of an attacking move. So attacking forcing moves are also good in chess. So we have to agree, I think bishop to a6, for instance, is an attacking move. It's attacking immediately the pawn on c4. It's forcing your opponent to do something. Although we're not battling again for the e4 square, but this move bishop to a6 is now forcing white to do something. And now after move bishop to b3, we can play now d5, or we can play immediately something like a bishop to b4. We can immediately attack, save some time, and then maybe takes, and also castling here kingside. So as I said, forcing attacking moves that are forcing your opponent to do something are not so bad, because when you play an attacking move, your opponent makes a move and he's losing now suddenly time. So as I said, when you want to break the principle of this one square rule, because we have broken it, we're not battling again for the e4 square, at least this move has to be an attacking forcing move. At least this move has to be an aggressive move, and we can agree this move bishop to a6 is an aggressive move. I'm telling you this because this is the defense that I used against d4. I like the Queen's Indian with this fianchetto variation. This is now the so-called Nimzovich variation of the Queen's Indian defense. So it's sort of my weapon that I used now recently against d4. So let's see now another example. Okay, I have some trouble. Okay, here for instance, you can play also some symmetrical ideas against d4. You can play maybe d4, d5, and after c4 you can play now maybe the Queen's Gambit declined, or you can play the Slav defense. So many of these defenses are often played in top grandmaster level. Many of these defenses are popular, but in my opinion, for instance, the Queen's Gambit declined is much stronger than the Slav defense. I've sorted out also here one important principle of chess openings, which is now under the number 4, maximum piece activity. So we want to bring our pieces on the most natural squares. What I mean about that, in this examples, for instance, in the Nimzo, you see the knight is on a very active square. The bishop is on a very active square. With the move b6, for instance, bishop to b7 that we have seen in the Queen's Indian defense, every of this piece is getting really on the most active squares. But here in this particular case, after move d4, here after move d4, d5, and c4, c6, you're taking away a very important square for your knight. So actually here the Slav defense, in my opinion, is not such a good opening like maybe the Queen's Gambit declined. The Queen's Gambit declined here allows you here to get your knight on the natural square. The knight on f6 will come, bishop to b4, maybe then afterwards we can play again b6, bishop to a6, bishop to b7, and then maybe with c5, knight to c6. The knight is getting on a very active square. The knight is getting on the 6th rank where it can again attack your opponent's side of the board. So it's huge different if you're placing maybe the Slav defense, you see, then you can only bring the knight here on d7. You cannot bring it on c6, where it attacks, as I said, here your opponent's side of the board. When you play it on d7, the knight is controlling only your side of the board, which is now huge difference. I think that's why the queen's gambit declined is much better than the Slav defense. So you if you want to play maybe the symmetrical stuff against d4, my recommendation is to go here maybe into the queen's gambit decline. So let's see another example. Here we have d4 d5, d4 knight to f6, c4 e6, knight to f3, and here for instance, if you play the queen's gambit declined, we see that we have a battle now again for the e4 square, which is I think a good choice. And after maybe something like knight to c3, bishop to b4, you see you're bringing your pieces on the most active squares again. It's a huge difference, the queen's gambit declined, than maybe the Slav defense. The Slav defense is not allowing you here, as I said, to take over on c6. Now we could try some c5 ideas, knight to c6, queen to a5, knight to e4. So you see we're getting sort of an attacking flow. We have really beautiful setup, and when you have a beautiful setup in chess, I guarantee you that you will not have problems in the continuation of the game. So let's see now another example, and it's now the so-called Alekhine defense. And the problem about the Alekhine defense is that it's meaning, okay, it's meaning with this principle that it attacks your opponent's side of the board, but your opponent could get a huge space advantage. So let's see, here we have e4, okay, we have knight to f6. The knight on f6 move is of course attacking your opponent's side of the board, but it's now a huge difference in my opinion. It breaks with this principle that I've sorted out here. It's allowing your opponent too many space advantages, because here after move e4, of course after knight to f6, e5 will come. You have to play something like here knight to d5, then d4, you're trying maybe d6, but you see now with the move c4, knight to b6, white can even play f4, and suddenly you have, I think, many positional problems, because again white is simply storming with his centralized pawns here, and you have, as I said, probably many positional problems. If you're a beginner and maybe you're facing a much stronger opponent, imagine you get this position. I don't think that it's a good position for yourself. Okay, it is playable. Maybe you can say Magnus Carlsen played this opening, I don't know, Alexander Grishuk, Garry Kasparov played this opening, but as I said, I really wanted to save you some time, because there are many better openings against e4. You can play, for instance, after move e4, you can play a Sicilian, or maybe here something like e5, going into the Rui Lopez Italian game, and similar stuff. So here let's see now another example. You can also maybe play some ideas that are meeting with our first move attack here that we have explained. Here you can maybe play after move e4, you can play the so-called Scandinavian defense, but the problem about the Scandinavian defense is that you're losing too many tempi with one particular piece. So for instance, if your opponent takes, of course, queen to d5, and the queen gets a little bit exposed, then we have talked many times in chess opening theory that the queen should not come out very early in the game, because when that happens, then of course the queen becomes an object of the attack. I just wanted to show you one game. It's a game played by Dominguez Perez Liner against Manuel Hoes Leon. What kind of a problem you get always when you expose your queen too early. I'm not going to analyze now the game in a good way, really. I just wanted to show you the common problems when you're playing with the queen. So you see your opponent, after move queen to d5, gets many tempi against the queen. So you see bishop to d2 is already there. So it means white is developing, and you're losing simply too much time with the queen. In the next couple of moves, we can expect, I think, that the queen will move again, because here we have a beautiful attacking possibility by the bishop on d2. So you see you have lost too many times simply with one particular piece. Meanwhile, your opponent is doing something. Knight to f3 will happen, bishop to d3, queen to e2, maybe queenside castling, kingside castling. So again, in the next couple of moves, you lose probably one move with the queen. So knight to f6, we have bishop to d3, we have this bishop to g4. As I said, I don't want to analyze the game. I wanted to show you how the queen became the main problem here. Knight to e4, you see the queen lost again a new tempo. So the queen has already played once twice, 3 times. Meanwhile, you see all of the minor pieces of whites are out, which is now huge developing advantage, because your opponent you have to play here for yourself, for instance, the move bishop to e7, so you lose 1 tempo, then 2 tempi again with the knight. In order to bring the knight, it's a 3rd tempo at least, so at least you need 3 more moves just in order to develop your minor pieces. Meanwhile, you can imagine what white can already do in 3 pieces, so in 3 moves. So that's why I think here I've sorted out, you're not allowing tempi against 1 piece without compensation. You can maybe have a compensation, maybe you can take a pawn, maybe you can have a good position with that pieces that you have played many times with. But I think for instance, the Scandinavian is not a good opening, because it allows your opponent simply too much tempi here against one particular piece. So you see again, the queen got endangered, queen got on b6. Now here we have this stunner, knight to g5 happened, we have bishop to d3, queen to d3, and finally black took, but now the queen got endangered, and in a couple more moves black got simply destroyed here on the b file. Here takes, and now here Dominguez Perez liner. I just wanted to show you how you see white simply destroyed because the queen didn't have good squares. So let's go back. The queen got simply too much pressured here, and even a tactical shot like queen to c5 happens here. So as I said, I didn't want to really analyze the game for it's not the point about that. The point was simply that the queen simply lost too much time. So let's see now here another example of some opening theory. Here my recommendation, for instance, if you want to play something like against e4, you can play the move e5, and it's perfectly fine. And we have to notice after move e5, we're battling already, of course, for the d4 square. So this opening meets with our idea of this 1 square rule, and it's meeting with our idea that it's attacking already our opponent's side of the board. So here after move knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5. So you see it is sort of a battle here for the d4 square. Now we can play a6, and now after move bishop to c6, you can play now, of course, b takes c6 or d takes c6. D takes c6 is common theory, because after knight to e5, that would be a mistake. The problem is that you have lost now, from white's perspective, the battle around the square d4. So it's very important to notice that after queen to d4, you see knight to f3 and queen to e4. I think that black has here a comfortable game. Black is continuing the game with the bishop pair, and it's now delivering a check. It's now a different story. Although the queen is coming out, but the queen is coming with compensation. I've sorted out, as I said, under this last rules, this not allowing your opponent's space advantage and tempi against one particular piece without compensation. So we have sort of a compensation here, because the queen to e4 move comes, of course, with a check, and now it's a different story. Okay, you can play queen to e2 with trading of the queens, but now in this potential middle game, black has a dominant bishop here. So with bishop to f5, bishop to g4, queenside castling is even possible. So I promise you here a good game for black. So let's see now another example. We have again this Rui Lopez. After e4, e5, you see knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, a6, and now bishop to a4. Again, we can break a little bit this battle for 1 square. We have said we're battling for 1 square in the beginning, but when that happens, you have to create sort of an attacking move. So that's why here, for instance, the Murphy defense with the continuation of knight to f6 is actually good, because we're attacking already the weak e4 pawn. So it's an attack. So we have stopped to battle for the d4 pawn, for the d4 square, pardon me, sorry. We have stopped our battle for that, but with the move knight to f6, we're creating again a new threat, and your opponent has to react, has to play something here. The common way is maybe to play castling, because if you take, then you could lose a little bit the tactical battle on the e file. So that's why you play b5, which is again sort of an idea to battle for the d4 square, because the bishop was very annoying, and the bishop controlled the knight, which is of course controlling the d4 square. So after move bishop to b5, the next move is simply bishop to c5. And we have now a very popular position for black. Bishop to c5 is again meeting with our idea. Here we have the control of of the d4 square. So it's really, I think, very important thing to notice that in the beginning of the opening we're battling for one particular square, indirectly and directly, and I think breaking this principle can only happen if you're creating simple threats here on some other squares. So here this I really didn't want to show you now too much opening theory. You can choose, of course, some openings for yourself, but I wanted to sort it out really what are good openings. So here let's see now another example. For instance, the opening that I like against e4 is the so-called hyper-accelerated dragon Sicilian, which is meaning with our ideas e4, e5, knight to f3, and you see now I like to play this move g6 because our next move, bishop to g7, is meaning with the idea that we're battling for the same square. So your opponent can play maybe d4, c takes d4, knight to d4, bishop to g7, so we're battling for the one square. Here after move knight to c3, we're playing knight to c6, and you see every of my developing move here is simply battle for the d4 square. So that's why, in my opinion, this hyper accelerated dragon Sicilian defense, and there are also some accelerated dragon Sicilian defense which are meeting with the same ideas. Knight to c6, you see, and bishop to g7 are battling for the same square, and we have played so far 4 moves, and 3 of them were simply a battle for one square. So here after move bishop to e3, we have to develop, of course, knight to f6, and now kingside castling will happen, and you're perfectly fine. You have a good setup, and I think you could have a comfortable game as black. So that's exactly what you want to get. You want to get equality when you're playing with the black pieces. So that's why I think the hyper accelerated dragon Sicilian defense is meeting with all of our ideas. So we're starting, for instance, e4, we have c5, which is meaning the idea that we're attacking already our opponent's square, our opponent's side of the board. Now after move knight to f3, we're meaning with the idea that we're battling for the same square. So here let's see now another example. We have now, for instance, an opening that you can play, but it's breaking a different principle. Maybe after d4, you can play here the so-called Dutch defense. And in my opinion, the Dutch defense is also not so good because, okay, it is meeting with our principle to attack the other side of the board. It can also be something like after c4, knight to f6. It means also with the idea that we're battling for the same square, because you see the knight on f6 is controlling the e4, the pawn on f5 is controlling the e4 square. But the problem, I think, here in the Dutch defense is here the weaknesses on life force. So the Dutch defense can be played like any opening, but I think if you're a beginner, then you have many problems to secure the king after castling, because your opponent could destroy you. There are even some gambit lines after maybe f5. You can play these lines. You can play the so-called Krejci gambit, or you can also here meet the Staunton gambit, which is playable for white. I think that you will face many positional and tactical problems around the square f7. In my opinion, it's something that you should try to avoid if you're beginning, but maybe if you're playing in the later stage of your career, maybe the Dutch defense is playable. I'm not a big fan of it, so as I said, here it's simply too weak here around the square f7. So let's see now a different example, and this will be now our last example, because then afterwards I will have a sort of recommendation what you can play against d4 and e4. Here you can also play, for instance, something like d4, d5, c4, e6. We have the queen's gambit decline, knight to c3, knight to f6, and after bishop to g5, you see here it's a now huge difference when we play now the game from white's perspective. Let's flip the board a little bit here. After move knight to f6, you can play now several options. You can play the so-called Harvard's attack with the move bishop to f4, or you can play the move bishop to g5. If we are thinking about this one square rule, then we have to agree, I think, that this move bishop to g5 is much more powerful, because you see it's attacking the knight and it's controlling the d4 square. Of course, bishop to f4 is possible, and it can be played in many ways, and I play the move bishop to f4. I'm breaking myself a little bit the principle when I play chess, but you have to be really prepared in this line if you want to play bishop to f4. But when you think about some opening moves in the beginning and you ask yourself the question, which move is attacking the d5 square directly or indirectly, then we have to agree, I think, that the move bishop to g5 is more accurate because the knight is controlling the d5 square, and you see it was all about the d5 square in the beginning. So that's why, for instance, the move bishop to g5 is slightly more accurate than the move bishop to f4. So okay, this was now our example. So I hope you realize, let's go back. The most important thing is to recognize that first of all we have to battle for one square on the other side of the board, on our opponent's side of the board. You have to do that in order to have a good setup. Then afterwards we're battling for the same square. We want to develop, of course, we want to get our king secured, we want our minor pieces out, but we have to battle for one square. So it's very, very important, the one square rule, to recognize. And when you meeting the idea, then you know that you're playing a good opening, because as I said, many defenses you can play. You can play d4, okay, let's maybe see e4, d6. The first defense is not so good because it's controlling only here these two squares on your side of the board, and you already lost the battle here in the center of the board, because the main line would be something like d4. It's the same with the French e4, e6 again, or you're battling only for these two squares, which is not good. You have to play something else. So as I said, in my opinion, and that was now our last part, I wanted to show you here the opening suggestions against e4. My recommendation is to go into Sicilians. So with the move c5, you can play many Sicilians. There are really brilliant Sicilians that you can play, and you can really have good success. I like to play, as I said, the so-called hyper accelerated rank Sicilian defense. And don't get tricked into some stuff, because many times I see also on YouTube and also in some books that someone is saying this is the best opening against e4, this is the best opening against d4. So don't get tricked into it, because it's really wild, because you can maybe play this opening for 5 years, 2 years, maybe 1 year, and you have lost time because suddenly you're noticing that it's actually not so good when you get maybe a higher level in chess. So as I said, don't lose time. In my opinion, Sicilian, or here the common Rui Lopez Italian game, your opponent from white's perspective is basically choosing what he's going to play. So here I think you can have a decent position already. So against d4, my recommendation is, I've written here out the nimzo-Indian or the Queen's Gambit declined, Ragozin classical system. So here, for instance, you can play d4, knight to f6, after c4 and e6, knight to c3. We're in the nimzo, we're battling for this square. As we said, if your opponent delays, knight to f3, then you can go into the Queen's Gambit decline, or you can go also into the Indian here with the move bishop to b4 immediately. So it's sort of a recommendation that you can also play immediately. But as I said, all of these ideas, the Queen's Gambit or this Queen's Indian defense, is meaning again with the same idea that we're battling simply for one square. So it's, I think, a decent opening. So against d4, as I said, you can play the nimzo, Queen's Indian defense, or the Indian defense. You can also play the Queen's Gambit declined. As I said, in my opinion, the Queen's Gambit declined is perfectly fine, but it's more of a drawish line, I think, after e6. Here, knight to f3, knight to f6, knight to c3. You can go maybe into the Ragozin. The Ragozin defense would be sort of I think one of the most aggressive openings that you can play, but this idea can be, of course, met with the queen to a4 move, then knight to c6, which is playable now, I think, for both sides. But even if that happens, I think we can agree that already, for instance, in this position, we have 3 pieces out, which is a good move, which is a good choice. We're now in the move of 5, and we have brought out already 3 minor pieces out, which is a huge thing in opening development, because here we can notice black has a decent setup. King side castling, bishop to d7 will happen. It will be sort of an indirect attack against the queen. So white has now also several problems with the queen. So as I said, this could be a recommendation here against d4. So against c4, I like to recommend you, for instance, if your opponent plays the move c4, I would recommend you to go maybe into some reverse Sicilian stuff. So here it's the so-called King's English variation. After move c4, e4 is perfectly fine, and then again you're battling now for the d4 square. So you can play maybe something like here knight to c6, and then you can also go g6, bishop to g7, again battling for the same square. So you have now your target. Your target is the d4 square, and now in the continuation of the game you're battling simply for this square. So as I said, you can also play, I've written out here nimzo-Indian methods, because your opponent doesn't have to play after move c4, and you want to play maybe sort of a nimzo-Indian defense. Your opponent doesn't have to play d4 and allow you to play the nimzo, maybe with the knight to c3, bishop to b4. Your opponent can play something else. After knight to f6, he can play bishop to g3, bishop to g2, and still you can play something like, I don't know, maybe e6. After bishop to g2, you can play d5, and still you have your battle for the e4 square. So as I said, you can play maybe similar stuff. You can play ideas of nimzo-Indian structures, but without actually going into the Bogo or nimzo-Indian. So I think you get what they are, you get the idea, because in chess I think generally it's very important to have a decent opening repertoire. So as I said, in my opinion, you have to first apply this one square rule. Also your opponent's side attack of the board, very important, and also I've sorted out this other principles that are very important. So we have here attacking, forcing moves, very important. If you don't play for one square, at least the moves that you're making have to be forcing attacking moves, and they have to be aggressive moves. And the most important principle of opening theory is that you're not allowing with his openings to get him too much of a space advantage. You don't allow your opponent also too many tempi against one particular piece. We have seen, for instance, in this Alekhine defense, as I said, after e4, knight to f6, e5 happens, and then you get simply destroyed because white is building a powerful central control. So here I wanted to also show you how different this can be, because for instance you can play something, if you may be King's Indian player, then you see the huge difference, because we have lost the battle, as we said, around the e4 square. Your opponent is simply building that attack, and again after d6 you see with the move f4, again white can, for instance, go into the 4-pawn attack, which is very annoying to play against, just because you haven't battled for one square in the beginning. If your opponent wants to build maybe a 4-pawn attack against your nimzo, it's not possible. So you see knight to f6, you play c4, e6, knight to c3, here after move bishop to b4, e4 is suddenly not a possibility anymore, because it's too much of a pressure around that square. So as I said, your opponent cannot build the 4-pawn attack against your nimzo. He has to play a different idea. So as I said, be careful what you're choosing to play, because I guarantee you in a later stage of your career you'll have problems with the bad opening. In the beginning you can win maybe some games with the French, with the Perts, with, I don't know, with the bad openings, but then afterwards, if you're getting stronger and stronger, you will realize then afterwards that you have many positional problems in that opening. So okay, I hope that you realize these ideas, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more about opening principles, mid-game strategies, endgame strategies, check out my Basics in Chess series videos. In that we have explained really the most important principles in chess in more than 160 videos. So it's a huge playlist. Check it out and have a better theoretical knowledge. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.